Good morning, Center for Spiritual Living, Palm Desert. It's Reverend Charles Hall, your associate minister. I'm so grateful to be with you this morning for a very special service that we have planned. Out of the ordinary, something very appropriate to the time now. I look forward to presenting you who's going to be sharing with us this morning. But before we do that, I'd like to open us with a prayer and then a couple of announcements for the coming week, and then introduce our beloved spiritual leader and our guest speaker this morning as I enter into a dialogue. So first things first, let's take a moment and turn our attention inward. And let's take a deep breath together. How beautiful the breath is, the very foundation of life itself. And have the capacity to take a breath lets us know that we are more than just the breath now. We are alive. And to be alive means that we are living within God's great universe, right where we are right now on this holy Sunday morning. Holy because I say it is. Sacred because I'm aware that it is. And although we gather once again virtually, I know that as a community, we are connected in heart always. And that is the platform from which we launch in this magnificent service this morning. I'm grateful to our spiritual leader, Dr. Joe Hooper, for the staff and the crew that puts this service together, for our wonderful guest, Jafon Seeley, as he shares his wisdom with us this morning, this very special service. I bless us each right where we are. I know that we throw our hearts open wide to receive a sacred blessing, that forever changes us for the good. I'm grateful for today and for this morning, for this service exactly the way that it unfolds. It is a blessing. I'm aware of it. I call it good. Together we say, and so it is. Amen. Thank you, community, for joining me in that moment of prayer. Before we get into the meat, the substance, the primary substance of our service this morning, I'd like to highlight a few announcements for the coming week, starting with Monday. As you know, we do something every day at 10 o'clock, and we continue with that. So tomorrow, we have a special conversation with Dr. Joe and Joyce Bulifant. So Dr. Joe's going to interview her about her wonderful career in Hollywood, the adventures that she's had, and how she's applied spiritual principle to her unique path. She's got a wonderful story to tell. I'm sure it's going to be wonderful. So that's tomorrow, Monday at 10 a.m. And then on Tuesday, you're going to get to meet this guy in just a minute here and get to know him better. And I'm sure then after that, you're going to want to tune in on Tuesday with Jafon Seeley and Dr. Joe having a conversation. I would imagine there's going to be some follow-up to what we talk about today, but we'll see where these conversations go. It's always fascinating. So again, that's Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. You can see the graphic there. On Wednesday, the Sensational Six is back with us, our ministerial students who soon, within the next couple of weeks, won't be students anymore. They will be graduated. They will be fulfilled. Well, you know, I always say ministerial school doesn't start until after you graduate ministerial school. But anyway, it's fun to have the REV in front of you and in front of your name. And they always have wonderful perspective to share on spiritual principle, their unique walk, and how we can apply principle to our daily lives. So join the Sensational Six. That's on Wednesday at 10 o'clock. And then we all know Daniel Namod. He's part of our community for sure, as he is part of so many communities and blesses us with his music. So on Thursday at 10 o'clock, Dr. Joe, Concert and Conversation, Dr. Joe and Daniel Namod will bless us with his beautiful music. And of course, we know about those concert and conversations. They weave between wonderful dialogue and then uplifting music. So again, Thursday at 10 with Daniel Namod. And then on Friday, Friday is, oh, there it is, Dr. Joe and Reverend Charles. Hey, I'm back in the mix. So that's Friday at 10 o'clock. Myself and Dr. Joe, we always have a lot of fun doing those things, just kind of jumping down the rabbit hole and seeing where it takes us. So that's Friday at 10. And then on Saturday, We offer one of our unique meditations by one of our ministers or ministerial staff here at the center for a Saturday morning uplift, contemplation, a moment to just take a deep breath and go into your weekend renewed and rejuvenated and made new. And then, of course, next Sunday we'll have another service. So that's the next 7 days, every morning at what time? 10 o'clock Pacific time. So that's what's happening. And at this moment, I'd like to introduce a video that was recorded by Dr. Joe earlier this week, which tees up what's going to happen for the remainder of the service. So I invite you to listen to the words of Dr. Joe, and then when we come back, you will see Dr. Joe and Jafon Seeley sitting in these chairs here as we dive into a wonderful, life-giving, challenging, and necessary dialogue about what's happening right now. So enjoy the video. Here we go.
To go. So you'll have to watch it later. We'll add it to the YouTube later on. So hi, good morning. My name is Dr. Joe Hooper, and I'm glad you're joining us today. Today is a very interesting day. We're in an interesting time. We're in a very interesting time, and I asked Jafon Seeley. Jafon Seeley, here, welcome. It's so funny. I've seen him on his YouTube channels. I've seen him lecture, but I've never really been in your presence, and I can't wait to have today's discussion. So I started out earlier by saying, sharing with Jafon. I want to share a story with you first before we get into our conversation. In 1968, in the race riots in Michigan, in Detroit, and in the Flint area, my dad was a school administrator. And I remember, I was only 5 or 6 years old at the time, but I remember there was a lot of tension and a lot of hostility. And my dad was a leader in his community. And we actually had threats from the KKK on our family's lives because my dad was making a true effort to bring the African American community and the white communities together so that we could start living together. He worked in a district that was 50% black and 50% white, and there were really a lot of tensions. And the other day, I was watching what was happening in the world, and I began to think of my father. And I thought, what would my dad do in a situation like this? Because it's important and incumbent upon each one of us who have an interest in what's going on in the world to take a look at this again and to try to bridge what we can bridge. But many of us come from a place where we don't understand. And I myself, I think I understand, but there's obviously some real blind spots that I have in my consciousness. So I wanted to bring someone in like Jafon to share his story and to share his wisdom. He's a black man, and he is an author and a speaker, and he is a very wise man. He's got his book here, The Book of Essence. Not only that, he brings a perspective, and a spiritual perspective that I think we need to shed on this situation, because we can't change anything if we refuse to look at it. But once we look at it, we can begin to change something. So we can't just turn away from the condition. Sometimes in the science of mind we say just turn away from the condition and turn into whatever it is that we want. And I don't think we can do that at this point. Something's broken and it needs to be fixed. And I think those of us in our community need an education. We want an education. I read on several posts saying, white people, wake up, white people, do something. And I'm going, okay, I'm awake. And I said to Jafon the other day, I'm like, I need you, and we haven't had this discussion yet, I said, I'm going to ask you. You tell me to wake up. You tell me to do something, and I want to be there for you. Now tell me what it is that you want me to do. How do you want me to show up in the world? How do you want us to address this in a way that we can actually bring about change? So, Jafan, I'm going to let you take over for a few minutes. I'm here. I'm here, and there are members of my community are here, and it looks like we've been trailing to about 1,500 people a week are watching this over the course of a week. So we're going to touch a lot of lives, and they're asking the same questions. So first of all, white people show up. I'm here. You're here. I'm here. Let's talk.
Let's talk.
How do you want to even start this conversation?
Well, I think it's very important for me to simply say that my voice does not stand for the entire black community, nor your voice for the entire white community. I simply can only speak from my experience, and that's what I'm going to share today. I'll share some insights, some ideas, some things that I believe all of us could begin to embrace that can take us towards what we say we want, which is a world that works for everyone.
Right.
But a world that works for everyone does not allow us to simply ignore, avoid, or deny many of the realities that countless individuals are experiencing in this day and age. So maybe I could simply start off by answering a question that I hear a lot of people asking, and that has to do with, okay, I understand, or I think I understand, there is a lot of things that are happening out there. There is suffering, there is racism, there is discrimination. We see another black man, as I shared, we celebrated Memorial Day for fallen soldiers, people who have been at war to help bring about freedom that we experience in this country. And on the very next day, we witness a black man with the knee of a cop to his neck as we watch a public lynching. Now, social media is a fascinating thing. It seems as if the first form of social media here in America has been the lynching of black people. They would gather entire communities to come and watch a black person hang. That is something that is very real in our history of our country. Now, if we begin pointing at, well, okay, we understand there's injustice. We understand all of these things. Why are they burning down their communities? Why are they looting stores? And I'm not going to say who's doing what. I haven't been on the ground watching people break windows. I've just seen it through the lens of the media. And I just want to say, if we are solely pointing our fingers at what somebody is doing, a behavior, looting, damaging, whatever we want to call it, without addressing the root cause of the problem, which is systemic oppression and racism that this country has been built upon. There is no denying that fact. If we are not willing to look at the cause of the effect, then we're just going to continue to point fingers at specific behaviors without ever truly addressing the root cause of the issue, which is racism. And it doesn't, racism, I'll pause here for a second, but racism does not mean that, okay, well, we're in a racist society. Racist doesn't mean that you're going out with pitchforks and marching with the KKK. Racism simply means that we all could look back from a unique perspective and recognize there is a certain race of people in America that seem to have an advantage. And if we are unwilling to speak out about that, then these behaviors and effects that we see in the world by way of protesting, by way of looting, by way of people not knowing how to channel that anger, we're just going to keep running around in circles. And this is the time for us to have these conversations.
So when you talk about that, I go, okay, we like cause and effect. This is what we're seeing is an effect of something that has been ongoing for decades, years, centuries.
Before America was even founded, it was there.
So we have that as our past, and we all know that as religious scientists, we take, okay, what is now? What can I plant as my new cause to get the new effect? What can I do? What can we do to creating a building, the building of a bridge to say, okay, how can I change this? Because I'm sure every individual has some sort of a race consciousness in the back of their mind, some sort of racism, whether you're black or Hispanic or white, doesn't matter. There's always something, some cultural thing that we've picked up somewhere along the line that we all have to look at and examine. But in this particular case, while we're watching this happen, and we see it happen cyclically, and we're seeing it's happening consistently, how can we begin to change the pattern? Because the paradigm has to change. And I don't know how to change that pattern. I mean, I can sit up here and talk to my congregation about love and about acceptance and unity and oneness and balance and order and equity and all the, or equality and all those things. But if it's not happening out there, then my words are falling short of intention and action. And I feel like some sort of an intention action needs to take place. And it's hard, and you know this because we're watching, you know, and I want to call it, there's a difference between a protest, a demonstration, and a riot, right? I mean, protests have a purpose. And I think that when you see, like Martin Luther King, his calm demeanor and the way he protests brought about change, brought about social change. When you have something turn into a riot, that's a whole different category. Now that everyone's focusing on that, and we're not focusing on what the real issue needs to be. And that's creating a new cause so that we can all live side by side and create that world that works for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess part of my frustration is, and I'm just good, we're going to talk candidly about it, because I just, no holds barred, no questions untold or unsaid, right? Unspoken. So when someone in my ear grabs my ear and says, Joe, I can't hear what's being said because the effect is so loud and profound with the violence and the anger, I can't hear the message. How can I respond to that person? How would you want me to respond in that situation? Because that's what I'm hearing. How do I respond to that?
The way that I've responded to people who said that exact thing in my life. I'm half white. So I have people also sharing their other perspectives than just my black perspective. When people say that, I say, stop deflecting. You're deflecting the root issue and pointing at something that is surface level that you can see. And in that deflection, it brings about a sense of denial. And in denial, that is the fuel of racism. So racism will never be resolved by way of us denying it, by way of us ignoring it, acting as if it is not there, or it's not in our community, I don't need to think about it. That is adding fuel to the flames. So instead of deflecting and looking at a surface level behavior, looting, protesting, violence, whatever you want to call it, begin to ask, what is the cause of that? And what then can I begin doing to get at that root cause, to bring about some type of resolution? And that's where really it's not positive thinking. It's not just sitting in prayer. It's treat and move your feet. It's prayer. It's an active prayer. It's an active type thing. And I think for the vast majority of people, it's just so uncomfortable for them to begin to look out into the community and recognize the privileges that they've had by way of the color of their skin, and are failing, I'll say, at times failing to recognize that that is not the same for a person who looks totally different than them. For instance, I know that you mentioned that you grew up in Flint. I have somebody who's very close to me who grew up in a community where he was one of the only young white individuals, and he always would tell me, you know, Jafon, I was bullied, I was picked on, there were fights. I didn't feel like I was the minority in that community. And the thing that I tell him is, when you left that community, that hardship did not follow you. When you moved to a different community, the color of your skin preceded you, and people received you differently than, let's say, my father, who left from South Central LA after the Watts riots to Salt Lake City. When he went to Salt Lake City, and my grandparents and my father and my aunts and uncles, who are dark, way darker than me, they were not received the same way that this other individual left a community where he was the minority, a young white guy, and went to Salt Lake and was received totally different. So that's where we have to begin to recognize that, wow, the color of our skin actually begins to open doorways that, if we're not aware of, we're just simply unconscious of it, and we don't even know that it's working on our behalf. And that's when people say white supremacy. It's not marching with the KKK. It's not burning crosses on somebody's front yard. It's recognizing, look at CSL community. We can be honestly look and ask, what is the percentage of white people in the community? What is the percentage of white leadership in the community? Mm-hmm. Do we have representation of black individuals, of Hispanics, of a variety of different colors, shades, and backgrounds? The answer is, yeah, we have some, but it's not the forefront. And therefore, we're swimming in a sea that is around us of privilege, of supremacy, of superiority. And if we are unwilling to go into that unconscious realm that has been a fabric that we wrap around ourselves, it's difficult for us to find some type of resolution.
So how do you, okay.
I said a lot.
No, but I'm back to my question. I'll accept that, my community in Palm Desert is, primarily a white community. And even though they're Hispanics, they're in locally, and some black people locally, they're a minority within our community. But they don't set foot in our door, and I'm not sure why, because we keep opening the door, saying we welcome all faith traditions, we welcome all people. We embrace so many different types of people. Everybody, we just say, look, come here. If you've ever been rejected, come here,
right?
Because we accept you, we love you just the way you are. You don't need to change. There are things you can't change about the color of your skin, but your life can change. How can I begin to attract into my community so we can educate all people, so that we can start literally crossing over the aisles here that exist, even in my own faith community, and start educating people? But I can't get that word out. We've tried everything. I mean, we've tried all types of media things. How do I get the word out to say there is a community that welcomes you? And then what do I teach people? How do I teach this when the past continues to be drawn to the forefront? How do I teach us that we can move forward until there's a forgiveness to say, look, all I can do is say, I am sorry that the people before me have done the things they've done. I am sorry that cop, kneeled on this guy's neck until he died. I'm sorry that a woman in a park in New York is calling some guy and creating some sort of a stir that endangered his life. And I'm sorry, I can apologize for those things, but I didn't do them. What can I do? What can Joe Hooper do, and what can his community do? What can the people that are going, okay, all this is happening, what do I do? What do I do? How do I have that conversation with you? How do I say, I'm sorry? How can we move forward? Because I think it's a real foundational issue. We look at things from 4 different foundations. We look at our health foundation, we look at relationships, we look at creativity and abundance. And if 4 pillars are not in place and they're not operating successfully, the human being isn't balanced. And I think that many times, culturally, in the African American community and the Hispanic community and the minorities, I'll just say this, many times the pillars are not functioning properly because of a lack of education, because of lack of health care, because of those issues. And then it rolls into that nasty thing called politics. And see, I think that's just crap, because it's not politics. Keeping people healthy and keeping people employed and keeping people, that is what creates a life for everyone. Mm-hmm. And that has always been out of balance. What can we do to bring it in balance? What can I say to you or to members of any community to say, look, I'm here for you, use me?
I think that's the trillion dollar question. I don't even think that you could put a financial type of mark on that. It actually, from my perspective, what it requires us to do is to really look within. It requires us to say, what are the unconscious perspectives and perceptions that I have when a black individual is walking towards me and his pants might be a little bit lower? A group of young black men are walking towards me. How do I feel about that? A black family moves into my community and they play their music loud, or whatever the stereotypical type of ideas that people associate with black folks. Why is that triggered within you? Another thing that I was talking with my wife about on our way here is, imagine for just a second that you were willing to leave your bubble, the Palm Desert bubble, drive up to San Bernardino, drive through that community, find ways that you can actually be on the ground with people who you're saying that we're going to create a world that works for everybody. We live in Redlands. If you think of the good communities and you think of race, the good communities are primarily filled with, what do you think?
Oh, okay. Affluent white people.
Affluent white people. Good schools are primarily filled with?
Affluent white people.
Okay. Good restaurants are typically in communities of?
Affluent white people. I get it.
Malcolm X said, if you grow up poor, your parents are poor, working a job that they barely get minimum wage, you go to a poor school, You get a poor education and develop poor skills so that you can find a poor job and continue to work for a poor wage and stay in that cyclical nature. It's not saying everybody. I'm going to have a message for people of color here in a minute because we are not victims. But I'm simply stating the fact that at times perhaps we can leave our bubble and say, what can I do in those communities that I simply ignore, avoid, or look at the news and say, this is where everything is going to,
Okay, you know what? I'm going to give you that, okay? But I'm going to ask this question. I want you to invite me to leave my bubble and go do something specific. Joe, I want you to meet me here and members of your community. I want you to take action, and I want you to gather as many people as you can, and we're going to go to wherever you want us to go and say, now, our task is to communicate with these people and get to know them better and understand what's happening in their world, and that will no doubt change the way I look at things again.
Okay.
Because when I educate myself, things begin to change. But see, I almost need an invitation now then.
Okay.
I need to say, because I can't drive to San Bernardino and just walk around. I wouldn't know who to talk to, what to do. I would be very intimidated by the process.
we drive through San Bernardino intentionally every week.
Okay, so why don't you teach me or at least allow us to gain an education by being a leader and saying, okay, if you want to learn, then I'll lead.
Okay.
Because that's what's needed. The voices like you are needed
bridge.
because I can't lead into that community without having a liaison in that community who says, okay, this is what I want you to see. This is what I want you to experience. I mean, Trey and I, my partner, we have traveled the world. We've gone to countries, underdeveloped countries, and we've seen situations. And they're right, we don't even need to leave the country. We just need to drive to San Bernardino. We need to drive to India. We need to drive to, right
the
here.
Navajo Nation.
Yeah, exactly. They're right here. We don't need to go that far to experience that. But I like the thought of having an invitation by someone who's going to facilitate that change. So, community leaders, I think, are really necessary. I mean, when I look at what Martin Luther King did and how he created community leaders within communities all over the country, and their task, their job, was to organize people of color and the white community and say, let's do this together. But I don't feel like anyone has offered that or given me that opportunity to say, I would like to be there for that.
Yeah.
So how can I get that to happen? How can you and I work together? Just here, we live in Palm Desert, or close by. How can I say, we need to facilitate something like this, and then literally reach out into the community and say, join me, because until we do this, we're still going to live the way we've been living.
Right.
In fact, we didn't reach. People said we reached the boiling point. I said, no, I think the pot actually began to melt.
Yeah,
We're beyond the boiling point.
Yeah.
We've been boiling for a long. You guys, the African American community, the Hispanic community, minorities, boiling. And then they hit a spot like this, and that coupled with the pandemic, coupled with economic insecurities, coupled with just all of these different factors, and then the fact that the African American community was hit harder with the COVID virus, all of those things are just evidence of a paradigm that needs to shift and change.
So thing that I think is very important, and this is something that my wife and I were also talking about. First, as it relates to disadvantaged communities, we do not need to go in and reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of people who are doing incredible things in the community. So one incredible way would be to reach out to the Black church. Still has a prominent footprint in those communities. So reaching out to leaders, pastors in those communities and asking, how can we support you? Another thing that is extremely important that we were discussing is we as individuals, I know I do this when I travel to Central America, have to release this idea of superiority. We cannot go in there and be the white saviors. We cannot go in there and act as if we have the solutions for something we don't know anything about. And go in there with this closed mind and I'm here to save you.
No.
When you don't even understand where they're coming from. Which brings me to the point of perhaps one of the greatest failings of the country currently and throughout history has been this idea of superior, inferior.
Okay.
Name a time in American history where the playing field has been even. Never. Name a time in American history where it's been truly equitable for everybody. Never. Name a time in history where it's been truly equal for everybody. Never. And if there's various
I get
levels
it.
of degrees.
No, I get it.
But I define human equality as removing this illusion of a superior-inferior dyad. The moment that you think you are superior to another individual is the moment that you naturally exclude them. And even worse, for individuals who have my color of my complexion, if we go into an area and feel as if we are not valid or equal, or we feel as if we're inferior, then we naturally exclude ourselves. So this is where you cannot claim this victimhood mentality. You can be empowered in spite of the uneven playing field. That's why Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Mahatma Gandhi, all of these black revolutionary or just minority individuals, the global majority, but minorities in this country pushed forward. They were empowered in spite of the injustices that they continue to experience. So
Yeah, when I say, though, I want to go into the community, I'm not going to fix it. I'm not there to fix.
Yes.
I'm there to learn, and I'm saying, I'm here to help you.
Exactly.
What can I do? I think the majority of people, the silent majority of people, and I'll say the silent majority of people, because I don't know if they're all being vocal, but I don't think they're all out there saying, okay, I'm willing to do all this, but I think the silent majority of people go, what can I do to make this, not make it right, but what can I do to help move the needle? You know, when you just said something that I have to jump on this, because
Please.
In the history of the world, right, let's just back up for a little. For the history of the world, there's been 25 years collectively where we have not been at war.
America.
Anywhere in the globe. 25 collective years, and it's like a week here, 2 weeks there, but you add them all up over the, and most of them religious wars, but there's always been some sort of conflict going. So we always say, I want world peace. I want world peace. Can't we all just get along? I'm not sure if that's attainable, but I do know that I can at least move the envelope or move the needle a little bit. And all I want to do now is try to move the needle and engage my community and when I leave, Reverend Charles' community, in moving that needle so that we're not standing idly by. Now, I have to tell you, though, I have reached out to the black community and the ministers specifically, but as a gay white man, the gay part, they didn't want me to participate in their congregations. So I'm going, wait a minute, how do I find that? How do I find that person who's going to let a gay white minister come in and bring his congregation, not a bunch of gay dudes or gay people, but just his congregation? How can I bring those people in? Well, there will be gay dudes, but they're not, okay. We have to have a little bit of fun. I mean, there has to be a little bit of style there. So anyway.
What are you saying?
Well, you're on the margin.
Elise dressed me here.
Much better shoes than mine. We won't even go there. All right. So how do we, and different faith communities, the Center for Spiritual Living, not just us, but globally, how do we reach out in a way? I mean, I don't ever invite myself to a party. I like to be invited to the party to say, hey, look, let's have this happen. I hate to say this. I need to be invited to the party because I don't know how to reach out into that community as a man that has been discriminated against for other reasons. We're not even going to go to that. But I can't even get that ear because of who I am.
Understand.
So how do I create a bridge for my community, and how do we create this? There has to be a mechanism by which, eventually you and I can work together and say, okay, this is the network you want to tap into, and this is where we want to go. Because right now I'm coming from a place of total ignorance in how to do that. And I'll admit to that ignorance. And ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance in this case is misery for us.
Yeah.
It's miserable. I mean, when I watch this stuff go on, my heart just breaks. And if that were my child, I don't know if you saw this, the mayor of Atlanta. Did you see the mayor of Atlanta last night? Wow, spot on. Go home. And I remember my dad in 1968 when he told us the story later on. He said he engaged the mothers of the community and they said, go get your children. Just go in there, and if you have to yank them out, and they were yanking them out of the places that all this violence was taking place, they took them home. They're like, no, we're not doing this. And I remember that. And when she said that last night, I thought, brilliant. Here we are again saying the same thing, but decades later, 60 years later, 70 years later, we're still in that. And it's like, okay, stop that. We can't even have a conversation while you're doing that. Do you think that's true? How can I have a constructive conversation when I go, like my daughter's in Seattle right now, she's under lockdown and curfew. It's like, how can I have a constructive conversation when I'm fearful that something could happen to my family and your family and everyone else's? It's like, this is a dangerous situation. People are out of control. So in my ear, I'm hearing my friend who's the cop going, Joe, this is my job and I've been doing it forever.
Yeah.
How do I talk to him and say, now, you know what, I think I need you to see a different side of this, because you're only seeing one side because he works with the DEA. You're only seeing one side of this. How do I bring him in and educate him? What's my line for him, Jafon? I'm asking you to give me answers and you don't have all of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that honestly, systemic racism and oppression is something that cannot be fixed with a simple conversation.
No.
And Dr. Cornel West had an incredible interview yesterday where he said, we've had in this country black faces in high places. That did not shift things to the level or trajectory that we felt it should, or people feel that it should have been shifted towards in terms of equality. Honestly, my friends who are police officers, who are great people, you know, I'm not here saying everybody is a bad officer.
No, they're not.
There's good and bad people everywhere, as many people often say. But true change has to begin very high. So for instance, perhaps protests would stop today if people in very high places, Congress, people holding Senate positions, perhaps the president, heads of police unions and departments came out and said, yes, this country has a major problem with systemic racism and oppression, primarily at the hands of the disadvantaged and people of color. We are taking a stand. These officers are being locked up the same way that any civilian would be. We're going to address this, and we want to bring you to the table, you as in the communities that are being impacted by this, to find a way where we can actually get at the root of the problem.
Okay, so what you're actually saying is vote.
Well,
Yeah, no, that's what you're actually saying, because if the leaders aren't there now, then you have to be part of the process that says, you know, exercise your freedom of speech and exercise your right to vote, because that's what it boils down to. I mean, every year I talk about, you know, don't complain about the world unless you go out and cast a ballot. And if you don't like what you see that's going on in the world, cast a ballot.
Yes.
In either direction. Make a choice. Make a choice, but for God's sakes, show up and voice that concern in the ballot box, because that's ultimately where it ends up. Because what you're saying is you want the leaders, and those people are elected. They're not appointed. They're elected. So it does become a real political issue. So we have to, and you know, I'm not here to discuss politics, but I'm just here to discuss our freedom as individuals. We were given free will and the power to use it, right? So now, when that boils all down, a lot of these have to do with the people that are elected into these positions.
Yes, the unfortunate thing about that are the people that we often are left to vote for do not actually have our greatest interests in mind.
Okay.
And that is far too common. Perhaps not on a city council level, but when we start looking at the people higher up that maintain the certain structure because they've been receiving particular benefits from the way that the structure is set in place, the idea of self-preservation comes to the forefront. And why would I begin rocking a system where my family is taken care of, where I can leave some for the future generations? And heck, I even got this money because my parents were able to be privileged because of the current circumstances. And hence the reason why I'm not going to really go into it too much, but even in Atlanta, we see, I lived there for 8 years, and the mayor prior to the mayor who's here, it seems as if their interest was not for the black folks. They were working in certain ways, and I'm not going to go too far into it because politics is politics, but they were keeping the current system in place. And then we talk about Martin Luther King. People always go back to Martin Luther King because of his terms of peaceful protest, but we have to understand the FBI tracked Martin Luther King. He was assassinated and considered a threat in America because of what he was saying. And these type of things are right in the undercurrent, and they've shifted him from weaponizing him, and I say they as in like the supremacists of the,
right,
you know, not KKK.
The perception of things, yeah.
Yes, but and now he's like a token. He's the token. Black people be like this, but yet if we look at American history, no peace has ever been brought about by way of peace. America was founded by a war. by breaking away from England and fighting them.
Okay.
And unfortunately, by coming here and killing natives, and by expanding westward at any means possible, manifest destiny philosophy.
Got it.
And then they sit back and say, well, why can't you be peaceful? Tell me a time in American history where everybody has been at peace. And not just, I'm peaceful, we're not fighting right now.
No.
But I'm talking about these underlying injustices
Oh, I get it.
that are there. And that's what I think we really need to drill in on. And the question that I have is, if you are silent in the matter, are you then complicit in what's taking place?
Yeah,
there is no one side of the equation.
Right.
The silent is neutrality, which reinforces what is currently existing and taking a stand and moving towards something better, even if you don't know where to start, even if it's, let me leave here and drive through this really rough community, or let me just pick up the phone like I would do in a sales call and call 35 people, 35 churches in a community, and see if one of them gives me an opportunity to just come and sit and listen.
Okay, so I'll give you this. In the 1980s, during the AIDS epidemic, when the government wouldn't even speak of the words HIV or AIDS, I demonstrated in Washington, D.C. We had a campaign called Silence Equals Death. And that's actually what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we would lie on the streets in front of the White House and get arrested. There wasn't any, I don't think there was any violence, but at that particular issue. But we would protest by getting arrested, and a silence equals death. Finally, people started talking about it,
Yeah.
right? It took that people to move out of the silence into the spotlight to have that conversation. So it sounds like to me that's part of this equation, is to move out of the silence and into the conversation.
Yes, and Desmond Tutu has a really great quote that I'll probably butcher here, but it has to do, if you're silent about injustice, then you side with the oppressor.
Yeah, oh, exactly. Okay, I'm getting it.
And it's difficult, it's uncomfortable, we're moving into the unknown, we feel hopeless, we're confused in this current time based upon COVID and everything that's taking place. And so it's like we're moving into a place where consciously, we have unconsciously embraced, we've been brought up in an education that, for me, I never learned about anybody black in school except Martin Luther King for maybe a week. I never, in my books that my grandma would read to me when I grew up in Salt Lake City, I never saw a character in those books that were black, that looked like me. Going to church in the Mormon religion when I was young, I never saw an angel that was painted on the wall that had a dark skin complexion. I walked into my Sunday school classroom and it said, "No niggers allowed," at 12 years old, and looking at this and trying to embody it and embrace it and think, what does this mean? And then I start forming my image based upon an image of inferiority, and everywhere that I went, I felt like I didn't belong. I felt like it was a privilege to actually have a white person be willing to listen to me. I felt that I had to heed what I had coming up within myself and fully respect them. That is what we've been ingrained to believe. Education, religion, policy, politicians, governmental, look at the incarceration rates. We don't have to look too far to see that, forgive my language, but shit is not fair.
Got it.
But it's never been. And I can succeed. I know I can succeed in spite of the unfairness. One of my greatest mentors grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 1938 he was born. Went to Dillard University at HBCU. Graduated there and went to Berkeley to get his PhD in chemistry, one of the only black people there. Graduated there, became the head of the chemistry department at the University of Utah, the only black guy there. And he said, okay, it's unfair. It doesn't matter. I'm going to succeed in spite of that.
But see, that actually bothers me. You know why? Because I don't want to learn about the exceptions. I want it to become the rule. I don't want it only to happen to a few people. This has to spread so that there is that equity. We see a lot of all-stars, not just the exception to the rule of people who broke out of that.
Yeah.
You know, it makes me sick to think that you would see that sign in a church or anywhere. It makes me physically
I've been
just
called
want to.
worse than that.
Well, and I've been called a lot of things too. But and that doesn't. But just to actually have to think that a child would have to go, and I get it. I know it's happening. It's pathetic. It's just wrong.
Yeah, and so perhaps something that we can do is, when you're around people and they happen to say truly discriminatory or prejudiced things, call them out.
Yeah.
If If you're sitting around your family table and it's Thanksgiving or whatever, and people are talking about these things that you know are not what we talk about.
Do you call out when black people that you're around, if they start bagging on white people, do you call them out and go, stop?
I let
Or
them.
the Hispanics? Are you asking me to do something that you do now?
Yes, I do, but I would say that it usually is not in the degree of throwing around the N-word or making these racist jokes about
Well, how about
black folks.
faggot or those kind of things?
Yeah, no, people don't say that around me.
Yeah. Well, people don't talk about me a lot of
No,
stuff.
no.
But as a whole, are we going to can we expect all of us to start moving in that direction?
have
Because racism happens on both parts. So if I'm willing to step into this conversation, I need you to step in and other people to step in and go, this all has to change. I said, when we come out of this pandemic, the whole thing about this whole pandemic thing to me was, they called it at one point the great equalizer, but it wasn't, because certain people were disadvantaged in their health care so that they didn't get the proper care, right? So, but if you look at it, this was a time, 10 weeks, we've been in this thing for 10 weeks or so, and I kept telling everybody in all these 10 o'clock shows that we do, don't come out of this pandemic the same person you came in. And with this happening on the kind of the tail end of this thing, I really want us to look at this and examine it and go, okay, that's why you're here today, because it's like, I don't want us to come out of this pandemic and the events that have transpired in the world and come out the same way we went in March. Because now we have an opportunity to educate and create a world, or begin to move the needle. Look, I'm not crazy to think that Joe Hooper is going to go out there and change the world. That's crazy. But if I can move the needle with one other person,
Yeah.
and you work with one person, and the other person works with another person, that's how we begin to move the needle slowly. And I will commit to doing that. And I'll commit members of my community who I know will step into that, and because we talk about standing and authorizing your experience, I want to be able to authorize my spiritual experience to be of service in any way I can to this community effort to help begin to move the needle and not participate in those conversations and not, but I want it to be all reciprocal. It's like, look, we're all going to have to agree to this.
Of course.
I don't want to be known as the enemy when I walk in, when I'm here to help. I'm here to do whatever I can to move the needle. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because there are times when I felt like, I'm perceived as the white guy, right? And I'm like, and I'm sorry. And I know this has done some things for me. I know the color of my skin has given me advantages in ways that I won't ever know. I mean, when I saw that video, there's a guy that put out a video that he shows kids driving while black. Have you heard about this? Driving while black, and he teaches kids that are getting their driver's license that if you get pulled over by a cop, this is what you do. And I saw that for the first time. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, I've had experiences where cops pulled me over, handcuffed me, and said that I had what I didn't.
Yeah, and it's like, put your wallet and your registration on the dash, hold thing. I mean,
those are things that we learn
like,
at a young age.
To me,
I've never, even though I have friends who are cops, people in my family who, like family friends who have been cops when I was growing up, I've never felt comfortable around them. And when I see them, it's like this, my heart beats. If I get pulled over, I'm not comfortable. Hence the reason why I go the speed limit everywhere. Use my stop 3 seconds at a stop sign, everything.
You're not risking anything.
No, it's
yeah, because I got pulled over. Well, I got pulled over for rolling through a stop sign, and I was sharing with Trey. I said the cop was black. I didn't think twice about it. But I mean, you would think twice about that.
Yeah, any color of cop.
Yeah. That's just crazy. But what's interesting you don't see though, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
What's interesting though you don't see, and I'm sure it exists, but you don't see the type of military authority with black policemen, even when dealing with the black community. You don't see that a black officer killed someone by holding them down, or I don't recall seeing that in the media. It may exist, but what you don't see is that the other direction. Mm-hmm. So I would like to think, and look, I'm not calling all cops bad, but because I'm not calling all people great. There's going to be a segment in any population that we're never going to move. That's our reality. That's my reality, your reality. There are people that are so they're just so entrenched in their position, we're not going to move them. But educate the educable is what I've always say. Try to educate those who at least have an open mind. When Charles prayed us in today, he said, let's come in with an open heart and an open mind. And that's why I wanted to at least have this, start the dialogue. We're not going to fix the issues here,
right,
but we have to open up the door in our hearts and minds so that we can begin to look at our own behavior and say, okay, how can I move the needle? How can I move the needle?
You know, one important thing, Dr. Joe, is many individuals in spiritual communities, particularly New Thought, embrace this concept that many have termed spiritual bypass, where you choose to completely ignore the issues at hand by way of saying that it's all one.
Yeah, you'll never hear that here.
I understand. I understand.
This is one center where you'll never experience a spiritual bypass.
Please do not spiritually bypass racism.
No.
Please do not spiritually bypass the prejudice and discrimination that exists in our world by way of many different people. But when we talk about racism in America, we have to recognize that race benefits primarily white folks. That is what we're talking about. Of course, black people can have certain things against white people, but black people do not have the standing or the structures in place in the community or society to hold white people down. White people have all the positions of power. I think like 70% of America is white, so we understand it's not going to be 100% black or whatever the case may be. But any minority does not have the structures and systems in place to oppress white folks. This system that we are in, I'm grateful, I'm here, I'm able to be in it, I'm able to meet people and travel and be in such great communities. But this system has been built by way of white folks oppressing people. We know that that is a fact. Going back through history, we are standing on the foundation, the bedrock of our country is on the blood of the Native Americans. Hence the reason why indigenous women are missing and murdered at a greater rate than any other race or ethnicity in this country, and we don't hear about it. They're silenced. We're on that bedrock of that, and racism is right on top of it. And we have to address what we're standing on in order to begin that resolution. In this book, I would highly recommend White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, written by a white woman, Robin DiAngelo. And this is a phenomenal book that many spiritual communities have been embracing and having groups where they discuss it, where people of color do not have to come in and tell white folks what to do or help them process through many things. That's something that they can begin to hash out amongst one another, where they can start realizing their pitfalls and then can come to the table with something. Because truth of the matter, there's no shortage of behaviors that we can begin to embrace of all races to at least start moving that needle. We just simply need to look. And I know Dr. David Alexander is a big vocal component. I know Brian Akers, Reverend Brian Akers in Maryland, who ruffles a lot of feathers at times. He's very strong in his, but yes, he is willing to hold people's feet to the fire, and he is calling out white folks when they do things that they don't consider racist. And we have to get out of this good-bad binary of that term racist. Being racist doesn't mean you're walking around and trying to go find somebody to hurt that doesn't look like you. Racist simply means that there are things that I am doing that is perpetuating and keeping the system in place. And if I am not doing something about it, then it comes back to that term of being silenced. I am reinforcing what is existing. There is no neutral ground. It's one or the other. And again, I'm sharing all of this from my perspective. Yeah. I have nothing but love for everybody who's listening, everybody who's watching, for you, for everybody here. I'm just simply saying some things that are at the forefront of my mind and heart.
Well, I thought it would be truly inauthentic for me to try to stand up and talk about this without having someone who's experiencing it. Because I can't say I've ever experienced the things you've experienced. I can never say I've been in your shoes in any real form or way or form, but I do know that it has to start with a conversation.
Yeah.
And so, in my mind, that's what I wanted to initiate today, was at least start to have the conversation. Now, I'm going to say, I have to one more question. I know we're running a little long. When we talk about the bedrock,
I thought you said we have 4 hours.
Yeah, no, I told my guy 4 hours. I said, get ready, we're going to have lunch. when you talk about the bedrock and you talk about the foundation and we talk about, you speak of that, and I go, I get that.
Yeah.
I can't fix that though. I can't change that's what my forefathers did. And so I feel frustrated when you say that. I have to be honest. I feel frustrated because I feel like I'm being held responsible for what this culture before me created, and I'm not able to break out into the new thing because I'm being held to the standard of the old thing.
Yes.
And so how does one answer to that? Say, I get it. I mean, I get I do. I don't get the, I shouldn't say that. I'm beginning to understand and continuing to understand how you speak of that issue. But how can if I can't fix that, I mean, I can't fix things that have ever happened in the past. How can I create and move the needle forward if I'm being held to that old standard?
That is such a great question, because I've shared that with so many of my white friends and family, and perhaps this is the reason why there's a disconnect when I say that. No, we are not going to be able to go back and change the past. What we can do in this moment, perhaps white folks can begin to recognize the privilege and benefits that they have because of the system that's in place. What we can do collectively together is to begin to move into the unknown, to move into uncertainty, something we're all familiar with right now. Move into uncertainty and begin to restructure that which we call America. Begin to identify ways in which the system that has been set up is continuing to support people who do not have a dark complexion. And there's many places where that's happening. But how can we begin to at least identify, okay, yeah, I'm standing on this bedrock. I can't go into the ground and change it, but I can begin to change what's happening above the surface.
See, that's where I feel like my work starts.
I think that's where we're all at, because
and I think that's why I'm here.
We're in this present moment together, and what we're doing here today, as you say, moving the needle, is creating the days of tomorrow. And so collectively, through these conversations, I mean, you don't know how much it brings joy to my heart being able to sit with you and have a conversation about race. And when I try to bring this up with some of my friends and family, it's almost like they get defensive. And then in the defensiveness, I have to backpedal and try to figure out how to say things that don't strike a deep wound, because it often brings about a sense of guilt. So having just open, honest conversations where, no, you do not have to see my perspective. No, I do not have to jump within your mind and try to change everything about you and the way that you think. And no, you do not have to do the same for me. But we can meet, have this respectful, accepting, compassionate dialogue, recognizing that we're in this together and it's various degrees to this experience that we call life. And from that perspective, we can move forward and create something quite incredible, perhaps a world that works for everyone. But if we are walking around and having these unconscious perceptions or this bias about certain people, a world that works for everybody is an illusion.
It's an illusion. Yeah, I get it.
And
so, thank you for that. Yes. I appreciate that. And I'm glad we got to do this today. What do I tell people as these riots will continue? Maybe, hopefully, they'll end soon.
Yes.
At least the riot part of it.
Yeah.
Let the protests stay where they are. Let the vigils be part of this. Let the impact of them not be a negative one in moving the agenda forward of having these conversations. So that my prayer for that is that, okay, everybody just go home, and those of us that need to step into leadership need to do that and help facilitate whatever we can facilitate to build that bridge.
Yeah.
And I can't emphasize enough, I want to be invited to that table to have that conversation. I mean, it's very challenging to come from the outside in saying, hey, will you be my friend?
Yeah.
It's easier when someone says, you know what, I'm inviting all of you to come have this conversation. And we will start. We were always looking for book studies and other things to do. I commit to you that we will be doing a book study. Someone will, if not me because I'll be traveling, but someone will be doing a book study on that. Because we have to begin to have that conversation.
There's another really great book, How to Be Anti-Racist, which is a phenomenal book. Perhaps I'll share a few with you.
Yeah. Well, you and I are still doing a talk show on Tuesday.
Yeah.
God only knows what we'll talk about there.
Yeah.
Who knows what will happen on Tuesday. Do you feel complete? Not complete. I don't think we'll ever be complete. Do you feel I want to make sure that you feel like you said what you needed to say. I feel like I've asked the questions I needed to ask.
Yeah, you know, the final thing I just would like all of us, doesn't matter color, creed, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identification, doesn't matter. Begin to look within yourself at this illusionary dyad that we've constructed of superior, inferior. And begin asking ourselves, in what situations do I feel as I am better than? And in what situations do I feel as if I am less than? And how can I begin to reconcile that within my own mind and heart? Because that is where the transformation takes place. It's not a change of behaviors. It's going to be something that transforms the way of our thinking, our attitudes, our perspectives, our beliefs, and then can take us forward. And in doing so, great things are possible.
So in closing here, I always talk about the speedboat turn and a glacial, or a cruise ship turn that moves slowly but steady. I feel like we have to take, I don't think this is going to be a speedboat turn. These are, like you said, this has been ingrained, but we actually have to start making this turn. We've talked about it. I've tried to do it, but I need to be better at it. And so do members of my community. We need to really make an effort to do that.
What if we just made a commitment that every single day, from our individual perspective, we would choose to do something to dismantle racism and oppression? It doesn't have to be some massive monument, colossal type of thing. It could simply be befriending somebody who doesn't look like me. Looking around at all your friends and saying, are there people who reflect somebody who is totally different? Contacting places and seeing ways that you could volunteer or support anybody, and just finding ways that we can begin dismantling the current system that exists, because in doing that we can open a doorway for human equality.
Javon Seeley, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be talking on Tuesday.
I really appreciate
and now, oh, and he has a book. Book of Essence. Tell him about this book. This is yours.
Yeah, this is my book. I didn't have this when I was here last time, but it was you got the authenticness of it. Poems of inspiration, stories of empowerment, and the key that unlocks the greatest you. It's just a simple reminder that if we're willing to look within ourselves, great things are there. The potential dwells within each and every one of us, and we can begin to honor, recognize that by way of our thinking, our emotions, our choices, and our actions. And if you and I, as individuals, begin to embrace those 4 key components, thoughts, emotions, choices, and actions, we then assist in the assembly of our reality, consciously co-creating that which we call our experience. So if you are interested in this, it is there, but I think first and foremost, this might be the one. Okay?
Well, no, also, how do they get that book?
So you can go to my website, jafonseeley.com, or it's on Amazon as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Javon, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for showing up today. A last-minute phone call yesterday morning, I said, hey, we need to switch things up, and we already had today's program, pre-recorded, ready to go, and we tossed all that out and said, we've got to address this, at least begin to address this with our community in a way that's productive, and have the conversations and questions that sometimes make people feel uncomfortable.
Well, please know, Dr. Joe, that I'm more than happy to be a resource or somebody that is willing to talk with anybody in the community or congregation about any of the things that we talked about today, or another question that they didn't get answered. I'm not here to say something and then leave. I'm here because we are here together, and I firmly believe goodness is available for all of us if we're willing to move forward. So
thanks,
let's
Javon.
do that.
Thank you so much. Reverend Charles, I'm going to have you come on up and with Jerry Lynn. Jerry Lynn's volunteering to play the piano this morning. We've kept everybody social distance. I want you to know that we've all been 6 feet apart. So I'm going to have Reverend Charles come on up and pray us out and take the offertory. We're done, man. Thank you so much. See you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
All right.
Awesome stuff. Thank you, Javon, for being here. Thank you so much, Dr. Joe, for your leadership and for the dialogue. This is just seriously the beginning, and life is good. So let's welcome an opportunity to share our financial good and resources to continue to support this work, support this center, and as we know that as we give, we are supporting ourselves, and we're supporting this work, this voice, this opportunity to take our game to the next level through our intentionality, through our commitment, through our willingness to have conversations that are hard. Those are the times when I've learned the most. When I've been confronted and invited into a higher expression of my being, there's a greater peace and fulfillment there. So as we consider our sacred offering for today, as you consider whether you're going to give it through text or PayPal or use your phone to really just easily scan that QR code there that will be up. Let's invite ourselves into a great awareness of prosperity, of circulation, of that law of circulation. And in circulation, there is no stagnation. There's richness, there's beauty, there's bounty. Like sitting at a flowing river, allowing the sounds to serenade us, expanding our heart and our mind. This is the flow that I invite us each into today. I'm grateful for this moment of circulation. And I'm also grateful for what has unfolded this morning. This wonderful dialogue and opportunity to speak words frankly. And there's always an opportunity to dive even deeper. And we will continue to do that. I bless each of us in our community. I know that we hold ourselves primarily and each other with great empathy and with compassion. That as we uncover things about our own lives that aren't as pretty as other things, that we can still hold ourselves in compassion. We're always growing. There is no finish line. Life only knows life, and that is to live, that is to expand, that is to grow, it's to learn. There is no stagnation here, only circulation, flow. I know this in every way for us today and this week. I bless all of it. I bless the financial contributions, and I bless our willingness to listen and to share and to grow and to become an ever greater expression of ourselves. I'm grateful for this moment, this service, for Jerry Lynn and the way her fingers sweetly dance across the keyboard. I call all of it good. And together we say, and so it is. Amen. Beloved community, for joining us this morning. Have an extraordinary week. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock as Dr. Joe interviews Joyce Bulifant. Have a beautiful Sunday. God bless you. We are out of here. Much love.